acara konferensi ilmiah dan workshop dengan tema Personality Excellence, Tackling Challenge in Contemporary Society diselenggarakan dalam rangka lustrum kedua Magister Profesi Psikologi Atma Jaya pada hari ini Jumat 28 Agustus 2015 di Auditorium Gedung Justinus Universitas Katolik Atma Jaya. Mari kita berikan tepuk tangan yang meriah.
Ibu Bapak yang saya hormati, pimpinan universitas belum datang ya, para kolega saya dan yang paling tercinta mahasiswa, selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Terima kasih Bu Bapak, saudara-saudari telah hadir di sini bersama kami keluarga besar Fakultas Psikologi Unika Atma Jaya dan terutama dari program studi Magister Psikologi Profesi dalam merayakan ulang tahun ke-10 dari program studi ini. Umur 10 kira-kira sudah di SD gitu ya. Mayoritas kita mengatakan masih kecil, tapi dalam perjalanan kalau kita menekuni itu bukan angka yang kecil juga. Pernah tertatih-tatih juga, saya kira kita semua yang mengelolanya pasti memahaminya. Tetapi kalau dilihat dari lulusan yang bertebaran dan hari ini alumni kami sejumlah besar juga bisa hadir di sini ikut merayakan usia 10 tahun ini sungguh layak kita syukuri. Nah, ini menunjukkan bagaimana kontribusi dari program studi ini, kontribusi dari fakultas terhadap perkembangan dari bangsa ini. Kalau dikatakan perkembangan bangsa ini rasanya terlalu besar banget ya, tapi saya kira cita-cita dari pendidikan kita adalah memang berkontribusi untuk pengembangan manusia Indonesia. Tetapi kalau dari program profesi sendiri, saya kira Bang Yo yang juga mengelola Fakultas Psikologi, ada Mas Tommy juga, kita tahu program profesi memang tidak pernah bisa mengelola dalam jumlah yang amat sangat besar. Itu beda dengan program studi S1. Namun demikian, dari jumlahnya yang bertebaran di sejumlah bidang, ya kami meyakini bahwa itulah kontribusi kami kepada bangsa ini. Dan ini sejalan dengan visi misi fakultas dan pasti jelas mendukung pada pencapaian mengapa institusi ini didirikan. Ketika didirikan jelas Pak Fransida mengatakan untuk Tuhan dan tanah air. Dan pada tahun ini di dalam perayaan ke-55-nya, jadi lustrum ke-11 Unika Atma Jaya, itu kemudian diangkat ke dalam tema bertumbuh bersama bangsa. Saya kira tema yang dipilih hari ini oleh panitia di program studi pendidikan profesi psikologi profesi jelas mengarah kepada hal yang sama, bagaimana kita berkontribusi secara langsung kepada bangsa. Dan itulah tema yang akan dibawakan oleh kedua speaker kita, Profesor Yan, Profesor Stephen Benton. Thank you very much for your contribution for our subject program. Dan Ibu Bapak selamat mengikuti seminar ini. Jadi pagi kita ada conference dan sorenya kita ada workshop bersama juga dengan Ibu Aileen. Ibu Aileen sebentar lagi akan hadir bersama kita. Selamat berkonferensi. Terima kasih kepada panitia di bawah koordinasi Mas Dharma yang mengelola kegiatan ini dengan sangat baik. Selamat pagi, selamat mengikuti.
Terima kasih Ibu Murniati atas sambutannya. Sambutan Ketua Program Studi Magister Psikologi Profesi. Persilakan kepada yang terhormat Dr. of Philosophy Hana Panggabean, psikolog.
Selamat pagi Ibu Bapak sekalian. Wakil dari Jaya, Mas Jul Messer, para pimpinan, rekan-rekan pimpinan Fakultas Psikologi dan program Magister Psikologi di Jakarta. Selamat datang saya ucapkan kepada para mitra-mitra juga, para mitra kami. Selamat datang dan terima kasih sebelumnya tentu saja untuk kesediaan keluangan waktunya untuk bisa hadir di acara ini. Acara ini memang merupakan salah satu acara syukur kami. Jadi tahun ini merupakan tahun penuh rasa syukur untuk program Magister Profesi Psikologi Unika Atma Jaya, karena pada tahun ini kami menginjak tahun ke-10 berdirinya Magister Profesi ini. Dan karena itu maka kami punya sejumlah rangkaian acara yang merupakan perwujudan dari rasa syukur kami dengan kami mencoba menyapa para pihak di sekeliling kami. Acara yang pertama itu sebetulnya sudah berjalan pada bulan April. Kami menyelenggarakan bakti sosial. Di sini kami mencoba menyapa para kaum masyarakat di sekitar dengan melakukannya di Desa Mekarwangi, Kecamatan Cisauk di Serpong. Itu adalah desa binaan dari Unika Atma Jaya. Dan di situ sesuai dengan bidang kekhususan yang kami kelola, itu kami mengadakan kegiatan dengan para lansia di puskesmas, kemudian juga para pamong, kelurahan, dan anak-anak SD beserta guru di SD negeri Mekarwangi. Lalu ini merupakan acara yang kedua. Sebagai rasa syukur kami, kali ini kami dedikasikan kepada pihak-pihak yang membantu proses pendidikan di Magister Profesi Psikologi yang tentunya sudah berkontribusi terhadap perjalanan kami selama 10 tahun, yaitu para dosen, baik dosen tetap maupun dosen honorer, para mitra kami, mitra kerja praktek yang beberapa diantaranya sudah bersama-sama kami dari mulai berdiri, jadi dari mulai 10 tahun, udah 10 tahun bersama-sama dengan kami. Lalu the visiting professors, thank you for your dedication and commitment for our study program. Para alumni tentu saja yang terutama alumni tahun-tahun pertama itu yang sudah mempercayakan nasib masa depannya kepada kami. Kan waktu itu belum ada bukti ya, belum terakreditasi gitu ya. Tapi para alumni ini sangat-sangat membantu dan gak ribut kalau kuliahnya kadang-kadang ruangannya belum siap begitu ya, sangat kooperatif. Jadi para alumni kami ucapkan terima kasih juga, dan tentu saja mahasiswa kami di sini. Jadi konferensi ini sebenarnya untuk kami, untuk kita semua, dan oleh karena itu pengisi acaranya adalah para mahasiswa sebagai MC, sebagai panitia, kemudian juga para visiting professor sebagai pembicara, dan para mitra-mitra kami, dan moderatornya adalah, kedua moderator adalah para alumni. Jadi ini adalah acara yang kedua. Kami masih punya acara yang ketiga, yaitu temu alumni, akan berlangsung di bulan September nanti pada tanggal 12. Jadi para alumni yang hadir di sini ini baru icip-icip ya, teaser. Nanti kalian punya acara sendiri. Kami dedikasikan kepada para alumni yang sebenarnya merupakan karya hidup dari program studi ini. Dan yang terakhir adalah itu pada tanggal hari berdirinya. Jadi hari berdirinya itu 15 September 2005 sebetulnya. Nah, pada hari berdirinya itu kami mengadakan acara misa syukur. Di sini kami tentu saja menyapa rekan-rekan internal di Unika Atma Jaya, jadi dari fakultas lain. Begitu rangkaian acara ulang tahun 10 tahun lustrum kedua dari Magister Profesi. Magister Profesi Psikologi itu ketika berdiri di tahun 2005 adalah program pasca sarjana yang keempat untuk Unika Atma Jaya. Tapi yang pertama yang berdiri di bawah fakultas. Kalau saat ini semua program pasca sarjana sudah kembali ke fakultas, seiring dengan semakin kuatnya kapasitas fakultas untuk mengelola program-program pasca sarjana. Tapi waktu itu yang pertama kali mempelopori adalah untuk berdiri di bawah fakultas itu adalah Magister Profesi Psikologi, karena memang kata profesinya itu mengindikasikan dia harus berinduk kepada fakultas. Ya, itu saya ingat. Nah, ini selamat datang Ibu Bernadette, persis pada poin yang pas gitu ya, karena saya mau kembali kepada pembicaraan kita 10 tahun yang lalu waktu Fakultas Psikologi mau mendirikan program pasca sarjana. Itu pilihannya mau bikin Magister Science atau mau bikin Magister Profesi. Nah, Bu Bernadette yang memberi arahan, katanya waktu itu beliau rektor dan bilang katanya kita harus bikin Magister Profesi. Mengapa? Karena dengan itulah sebuah pendidikan psikologi menjadi paripurna waktu itu. Nah, saya waktu itu iya aja, teman nggak banyak ya, teman kan pada sekolah, jadi nggak ada teman diskusi juga, nggak terlalu banyak gitu ya. Waktu itu Ibu Liliana sebagai warik satu mengatakan, Bu Hana, kalau orang menyekolahkan anaknya ke Fakultas Psikologi itu pengen jadi apa anaknya? Gitu. Saya nggak ngerti arah pertanyaannya kemana itu maksudnya. Nah, maksudnya tuh dia bilang dia bandingkan dengan kedokteran, karena dia orang kedokteran. Kalau seorang orang tua memasukkan anaknya ke fakultas kedokteran, dia pengennya anaknya jadi dokter. Gitu. Kalau seorang tua memasukkan anaknya ke fakultas psikologi, dia pengen anaknya jadi psikolog. Nah, oleh karena itu kita harus bikin program studi yang menyediakan jalan itu supaya orang bisa menjadi psikolog. Saya iya aja. Ya, belakangan saya baru tahu mengelola magister profesi jauh lebih kompleks daripada mengelola magister sains. Nggak ada liburnya setahun itu ya. Untung saya nggak tahu waktu itu ya, ditanya. Ya itu teman-teman nggak ada kan, jadi nggak bisa ditanyain ya. Nah, faktanya ibu bapak dari hampir 100 lebih ya Mas Yoya, prodi psikologi di Indonesia itu ada 100 lebih ya. Yang punya atau magister profesi psikologi hanya 19 ya Mas. Dari tahun 2003 semenjak program profesi berhenti sampai sekarang itu hanya 19 prodi. Artinya apa? Artinya memang tidak banyak yang punya, begitu ya. Dan karena itu kenapa tidak banyak? Bukan masalah repot, kalau repot di mana-mana juga repot ya. Tapi terutama karena kekuatan SDM. Jadi punya magister profesi psikologi itu kekuatan SDM-nya harus jaminan gitu. Dan punya network yang baik dengan mitra. Jadi dua kuncinya ini kalau mau mengelola magister profesi. Pertama, kekuatan SDM internal dan kekuatan mitra kerja praktek. Oleh karena itu, sekali lagi dari dasar hati yang paling tulus saya mengucapkan terima kasih banyak atas dukungan dan kontribusi teman-teman dan para mitra. Selama berjalan 10 tahun, magister profesi psikologi sudah bekerja di bawah 3 dekan. Katanya Ibu Bonang yang mengandung, Ibu Rosa yang melahirkan, Ibu Murni yang membesarkan, katanya begitu ya. Nanti dekan yang keempat yang mengawinkan katanya. Gitu ya. Jadi juga sudah mengalami 3 KPS, ketua program studi. Jadi selain saya sudah ada 2 sebelumnya dan 11 kepala program kekhususan profesi, 4 karyawan kesekretariatan. Jadi apa yang kita capai hari ini itu semua adalah hasil kerja banyak orang, sebuah orkestrasi saya kira dari kerja keras sehingga kami bisa menginjak usia 10 tahun. Saya berharap agar siapapun KPS-nya kerjasamanya tetap lanjut, tidak perlu lihat orangnya siapa, dekannya siapa, tapi teman-teman mitra, teman-teman SDM, teman-teman dosen luar maupun dosen dalam mungkin saya mintakan untuk tetap berkomitmen membantu kami tanpa perlu melihat siapa dekan, siapa KPS dan sebagainya. Semoga ini bisa kerjasama yang sangat baik ini bisa berlanjut dan kita bisa melanjutkan karya ini sehingga bisa juga melahirkan psikolog-psikolog yang bisa berkarya di masyarakat. Sejauh ini kami sudah meluluskan sebagai program magister, kami sudah meluluskan sekitar lebih dari 160 psikolog. Kalau dihitung dengan masa melakukan program profesi itu sudah 200 lebih psikolog yang kami luluskan ke masyarakat. Ya, panitia sudah angkat kartu, saya waktu sudah mau habis. Akhir kata, saya ingin memberikan sebuah kata mutiara yang sudah teruji kemampuannya, yaitu kata mutiara ala restoran Padang. Kalau Anda puas, sampaikan pada orang lain. Kalau Anda tidak puas, sampaikan pada kami. Selamat pagi, terima kasih.
Dilanjutkan dengan sambutan oleh Ketua Panitia dan dimohon sekaligus untuk membuka konferensi ilmiah dan workshop hari ini. Dipersilakan kepada yang terhormat Bapak Dharma Juwono.
I welcome Professor Benton, Professor Derson. Thank you very much for your attendance and for your presentation. Waktu kami pertama kali kemudian memikirkan di dalam gitu ya, saya, Mbak Hana, sebetulnya dimulai dari periode KPS-nya Bu Yanti sebetulnya. Kita memikirkan apa sih yang mau kita bahas sebenarnya. Salah satu yang menjadi permasalahan adalah sebenarnya kita mengamati juga psikolog itu di Indonesia tadi dikatakan ada 120-an lebih program studi. Yang punya magister psikologi profesi hanya 19. Katakanlah sama seperti Atma Jaya, dari 19 itu setiap angkatan meluluskan 20. Gitu ya. Kita hanya punya tidak lebih dari, dugaan saya mungkin tidak lebih dari 10.000. Saya tidak sedemikian ahlinya dalam matematika. Permasalahannya kemudian menjadi di mana sih letak psikologi itu? Di mana letak psikolog itu? Kita udah meluruskan cukup banyak banyak psikolog, tapi kemudian masalah di masyarakat masih banyak sekali. Contoh yang paling dekat misalnya, kenapa kemudian kita masih banyak sekali konflik dan dalam penyelesaian masalah itu selalu saja menggunakan kekerasan. Terus kita pikir-pikir, kalau kita lihat sendiri ke dalam, ke Magister Psikologi Konfrensi dan Atma Jaya, kami kan punya psikologi klinis yang konsentrasi di klinis dewasa, kemudian pendidikan anak dan remaja, lalu kemudian industri organisasi. Apa ya yang kira-kira bisa kita bahas? Nah, itulah yang kemudian akhirnya kami merumuskan dengan tema yang ada di backdrop ini, personality excellence, dan 3 konteks. Kenapa? Karena kalau seringkali pertanyaan yang mungkin diarahkan pada psikolog, kenapa sih orang ini kok bisa seperti ini gitu. Nah, kami sangat beruntung karena kebetulan tadi seperti dikatakan oleh Mbak Hana bahwa kontributornya hari ini adalah rekan-rekan dan mitra kami semua gitu. Profesor Benton dari tahun pertama sudah terlibat, Profesor Dirksen juga sudah membantu kami beberapa kali datang ke sini. Lalu kemudian dari pihak Kompas juga menjadi mitra kerja kami, tempat kerja praktek. Lalu kemudian Polda juga menyediakan tempat kerja praktek. Lalu kemudian Mbak Karina nanti juga adalah salah seorang supervisor kasus kami gitu ya. Kami pikir kenapa enggak mereka yang memberikan. Karena kami juga berpikir, ini kan psikologi profesi gitu ya, bukan konferensi ilmiah murni gitu. Karena bagaimanapun juga ilmunya harus dibumikan, ilmunya harus mampu menjawab pertanyaan-pertanyaan yang ada di masyarakat dan menyelesaikan masalah di masyarakat. Mudah-mudahan hari ini nanti dalam presentasi akan sangat menarik. Saya pikir di sesi pertama nanti kedua keynote speaker kita akan membahas, yang satu akan membahas kecerdasan emosi, dan beliau punya pengalaman bekerja sama, Prof. Dirksen itu punya pengalaman mendampingi parlemen di Belanda. Siapa tahu ini akan menginspirasi para psikolog dan mitra kerja yang hadir di sini untuk membantu konflik DPRD lawan Ahok gitu ya. Lalu kemudian juga Prof. Benton nanti akan membahas terkait dengan hubungan bagaimana kemudian organizational conflict di dalam organisasi. Saya pikir kita semua yang ada di sini yang sudah terlibat di dalam sebuah organisasi, kita tahu bahwa organisasi pasti selalu berdinamika, maka kemudian perlu untuk juga mengelola konflik-konflik dan perbedaan yang ada di dalamnya. Nah, nanti di sesi yang kedua juga nggak kalah menariknya, Mas Yoyo nanti dari kepolisian, psikolog juga, nanti akan membahas profil kriminal dari waktu ke waktu gitu ya. Kayaknya seru banget kan? Terus juga dari Kompas nanti akan juga melihat bagaimana kemudian mencapai sebuah kesempurnaan di dalam organisasi dengan mengandalkan kepribadian dari karyawan-karyawan yang ada di dalamnya. Nah, pendidikan nih yang katanya untuk anak dan remaja. Nanti Mbak Karina, Mbak Anyi akan sharing gitu ya, kira-kira sebetulnya apa ya yang bisa dilakukan untuk mulai mendidik anak-anak gitu untuk punya moral values yang baik gitu. Dan caranya akan sangat menarik. Caranya seperti apa nanti tunggu aja. Kalau saya kasih sekarang nanti dibilang spoiler alert gitu kan ya, nggak boleh. Nah, akhir kata kami mohon maaf bila ada ketidaksempurnaan dalam pelaksanaan ini, bila undangannya mepet banget gitu ya, mohon maaf. Bila kemudian kemarin Mbak Vincentia mengejar-ngejar, jadi datang nggak, ini soalnya kepentingannya karena kami sendiri juga memang mempersiapkannya, tadi seperti dikatakan Bu Hana, sangat mepet karena kegiatan pendidikannya masih berjalan terus, tapi juga harus mempersiapkan ini sendiri. Akhir kata, saya ucapkan terima kasih atas kedatangannya dan selamat menikmati. Saya langsung cepat aja supaya kita bisa lebih banyak diskusi nanti bersama dengan para narasumber. Terima kasih.
Selanjutnya kita akan memasuki acara inti, yaitu keynote speech oleh para visiting professors. Dan namun sebelumnya, perkenankan saya memperkenalkan moderator untuk sesi pertama, Ibu Sheila Soraya, MPSI, psikolog. Beliau adalah alumni Magister Psikologi Konfrensi Angkatan 2009 Unika Atma Jaya. Beliau saat ini menjabat sebagai konselor di United Nations Refugee Agency Indonesia, sekaligus psikolog di Peace and Tranquility Center, Jakarta Selatan. Ibu Sheila saat ini juga menjabat sebagai Director of External Affairs di Majelis Rohani Nasional Bahai Indonesia. Hadirin sekalian, mari kita sambut moderator kita, Ibu Sheila Soraya.
Thank you, Lili. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are very happy this morning to gather to have a very exciting conference this morning, and our first session will be on the theme of emotional intelligence and organizational conflicts. And as we know that both these topics are actually arising hot topics which are being discussed everywhere, every day in our lives. And we know that these topics actually are a very great factors in contributing to the well-being, to the harmonious relation, and to the unity and teamwork of individuals and organizations. So this will be a very exciting learning knowledge for all of us. And so again, we are very fortunate this morning to have two distinguished keynote speakers. And let me introduce to you, we have Professor Dr. J.L. Derrickson. And Professor Derrickson will be speaking on the topic of emotional intelligence. What is it all about? What is emotional intelligence? So we will get to know more about this topic. And then also allow me to introduce a brief achievements of Professor Jan Derrickson. Professor Derrickson studied journalism, philosophy, sociology, psychology, and psychopharmacology in Utrecht, Nijmegen, and in New Mexico. He was trained as a psychoanalyst, cognitive behavioral psychotherapist. He further founded Psychology Education and Teaching Center as a publishing company for psychological tests. In 1998, he accepted a position as a full professor at the Free University of Brussels, Belgium. His scientific work for years has been related to psychological assessment. It's on diagnosis of personality disorders and adapting psychological questionnaires. He authored and co-authored 36 books and more than 200 articles in Dutch and English languages. He also wrote columns for journals and magazines. And also his newest book, the newest book is on Everybody is a Psychological Disorder. There's a question mark. So I'm sure it's a very interesting book. His research work in emotional intelligence was received very enthusiastically in a corporate and educational work. He was invited to give many lectures and trainings on the topic of emotional intelligence. It's worldwide for managers and for teachers. Besides lectures, Professor Derrickson also contributed to many television and radio programs and developed a coaching program for emotional intelligence. So kindly join me to give an applause for Professor Derrickson. But our second keynote speaker, also we are very fortunate to have Professor Stephen Benton. And again, allow me to just read a bit of their achievements. Professor Benton graduated in psychology from Brunel University, United Kingdom, and joined Applied Acoustic Research Group at Chelsea College, University of London. Various academic posts have seen Stephen reaching and researching and lecturing in visual auditory psychophysics, psychometrics, cognitive psychology, human factors, and more recently business psychology. Stephen is credited with creating the first Master of Science Business Psychology programs, which has been running successfully since 1998 at the University of Westminster, UK. Stephen was awarded the title of Professor of Business Psychology in 2009. This was one of the first to be awarded in the United Kingdom. And then his continuing theme of his work is the identification of underlying psychological processes responsible for connecting behavior and performance, as well as development of applied intervention designed to augment and support an individual's quality of life and performance. Stephen is also the founding director of the Business of Psychology Center since 2001, and it's ongoing. And most of all is that Professor Stephen Benton has been with us for 10 years now as our visiting professor. So let's have a round of applause for Professor. Okay, without further delay, now we will be having this first session. We'll have the first keynote speaker, Professor Derrickson, on the stage, please. And then Professor Derrickson will be having 30 minutes of speech. Then we'll have the second keynote speaker, and then we'll have question and answers, and I'll guide you later on for this.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you very much, the board of the Atma Jaya Catholic University, for inviting me here and giving me the opportunity to speak for such a nice audience, and at the celebration of the 10-year master program. So I like to congratulate Atma Jaya University with this beautiful piece of education. I'm sorry for the photo. You have been looking at my photo, and I look way too serious. Well, but the photo is following me. It was published in a Dutch newspaper when I became 60. They interviewed me about my life and career, and then the photographer took 1.5 hours, and I had to look serious. And I forgot all about the photo until today. So it's kind of a little shock. I look that way only when I treat severe borderline patients. But then I use that expression. Otherwise I try to look a bit more cheerful, like my colleague Stephen. His photo is much better. Having said that, well, maybe the audience is a little bit too big to ask questions, but do you have any idea who this guy is? Well, I'll tell you. Some people think it's Plato. It could have been possible. They look alike a bit, the old Greeks, but it is Archimedes. And Archimedes, I'm very inspired by Archimedes. He was already 280 years before Christ. He already worked in physics and mathematics, and he discovered the law of the upward force, which equals the volume of the fluid. And Archimedes is at the beginning of physics and mathematics, and that is already very long. And then we have this guy, if it works. Not at the moment. Oh, here Archimedes was killed in Sicily. It was part of the Greek Empire, and well, the guy who killed him, he didn't know it was Archimedes, otherwise it would have been possible to produce still more scientific insights. That's better. Here we have Isaac Newton. He was a phobic guy. He never left the UK, but of course, with his Principia, he contributed a lot to physics and especially to mechanics. Some centuries later, everybody thought, well, it's almost finished, so we know everything. But then, well, this guy came up, and he put everything upside down again. And now, I won't talk about physics anymore or mathematics, but I have to be humble. Academic psychology is no older than 1.5 centuries. And academic psychology, you cannot compare that to physics and mathematics. So we have to be humble, and also we can be proud upon what we did in 1.5 centuries, but to put it in the right, perspective. So look at these remarks. I don't know about Indonesia exactly, but in the West, more than 40% of the population will visit a shrink somehow during his or her life cycle, because they have a major depression, or they have a panic disorder, or they have complex relationship problems. And indeed, my last book has the title, Has Everybody a Psychological Disorder Nowadays? It looks like that in the Netherlands. Huh? And in my reading about Indonesia, I'm reading that physical and psychological disorders are more prominent, also present in your society. And I'm sure it has something to do with the changes in culture and with the economic globalization that is worldwide. And the economic globalization demands a certain psychological profile of the people. And we are developing the stress level in our societies has never been that high. So there's much more stress in our society in the West than 40 years ago. And people have to adapt to that. The brain is slow, it cannot adapt so quickly, so the psychological patterns have to adapt. And then we need the shrinks. We need the psychologists and the psychiatrists and the coaches to help people. In Holland, everybody has a coach. So, I mean, you look at the complaints, lots of people have problems and are suicidal and having existential questions. There's a lot of substance abuse going around in the US, also in the Netherlands. Every Sunday evening, well, they bring youngsters to the hospital, because they took too many pills while they were on a nice party, in a discotheque or whatever. So it's also out of the perspective of a psychologist, of course, it is interesting, but it's also serious to analyze these some phenomena and try to do something about it. We have heavy drinkers and abusers. So people, so somehow for the human being, for the human mammal, it is hard, it is difficult to be happy. It is difficult to stay happy. It is difficult to stay in balance in our modern society. And emotional intelligence is a topic here. In academic psychology, cognitive intelligence, general intelligence has been researched most. It has been researched for more than a century already. And we know something about cognitive intelligence. We know how to measure it, and we have some definitions of it, and we have a lot of some validity research. And then about 40 years ago, the idea came up that cognitive intelligence is not everything. Not everybody with a high score on an IQ test is in the lead, or is possible to have a successful life, or is very efficient. And there's more there are more capabilities necessary for people to become successful and to become efficient and to contribute to society. So, and it was named emotional intelligence, and it is more an attitude-like thing. It has more to do with ability. I mean, cognitive intelligence, the IQ is a little bit more fixed. If you want to train your kids in cognitive intelligence, you have to do that in the first 6-7 years of their life. There your chance is biggest to train them and to take care that they will be able to study at Atma. Right? And then later on it's more difficult because cognitive patterns, they move, but it's more complex to train and to have them move. Emotional intelligence appear to be more fluid. It has more to do with behavioral styles, and it's more a growth concept. So when you assess somebody's emotional intelligence, there's a promise in it, and they have the capability and the possibility to increase their emotional intelligence and also become more successful in their life and become more successful in maintaining their health. Emotional intelligence appears out of the research that has been done, it appears to be preventive. If you are well on emotional intelligence, it will prevent you from getting physically and psychologically ill easily. So your psychological balance is better, and that has a lot of influence also on the physical health and the bodily complaints. So we all know, and you all know as especially as psychologists, what cognitive intelligence is about. It's about reasoning, about information processing, it's about solving problems. quickly and easily, and in the way that you can do that quicker, you can work more efficient, and you are easily in a nice and also complex job. But then still you can have a high score on an IQ test, and your life can still be miserable, because you are not really able to use your intelligence. Using your cognitive intelligence, using your IQ has something to do with EQ, with emotional intelligence. Are you able to use it, and are you able to manage your relationships? Are you able to use your potential? Are you able to adequately be interested in other people and have an idea about their feelings and their motives? And are you able to integrate that in your own behavior? And are you able to be assertive enough? And are you able to be, is your achievement motivation adequately organized? And that's all more about emotional intelligence. So, cognitive intelligence can help your education, but whether you are successful in the corporate world or at the university or wherever you are working, that depends more upon your emotional capabilities, upon your skills and the way in which you act. We did a nice comparison between cognitive and emotional intelligence in a very big group in the Netherlands, and then they appear to be rather independent. So emotional intelligence is called intelligence, but when you look at it theoretically, maybe it's more capability, yeah? Because the overlap with cognitive intelligence is very low. So what's the core of emotional intelligence? I've put it here in one sentence. It's the awareness, the understanding and the control and expression of your emotion. So don't think it is something soft. Don't think it is New Age style. Some people think that when you are on a boat on the sea, it's something like emotional intelligence. No. Emotional intelligence means that it's ego strength. It has to do with your capability of differentiating between your emotions and knowing what you are feeling, and being able to differentiate between anger or sadness or shame or guilt, and being able to contain that, and being able to understand that, and use your brains also, use your cognitive patterns to understand your emotions, being able to control that. When you are too impulsive, your emotional intelligence is lower. It's part of emotional intelligence, so being able to control your emotions and being able to express them in the right moments. Being able to use your emotions in the right moments. And of course, in the history of philosophy, widely has been written about emotions in the human person. And we have had all kinds of philosophers who thought that emotions were the enemies. We've had philosophers who thought that emotions were very gratifying. In emotional intelligence, it's more or less they get to a compromise, it's worked out in a way that emotions can be helpful, but then your emotional regulation, which is founded in early childhood, should be adequate. So that's a global definition of emotional intelligence. Well, the guy you see here is Reuven Bar-On. He's an Israeli colleague, and he developed an assessment measure, about 5-6 psychological tests for emotional intelligence. And in psychology, when we have no assessment measure, when we have no psychological test, we have not much. You need theory in psychology, but you need something to measure it also. So there are 4 or 5 different measures around. But his psychological test, it's a self-report, 133 items. It's a quite simple test, but it took him 16 years to build it and to do research on it. And it appears to be pretty well, although it's a weak instrument because it self-reports, it depends upon self-evaluation, and how can somebody with low emotional intelligence evaluate him or herself? So that's an inherent problem, but still, out of research, there has been a lot of data have been produced with the test, and it appears that the validity and the reliability is good. It has a high standard, and it has been translated in 30 languages, also in Bahasa. And Bar-On was in the beginning the founder of it. So his test has 5 aspects: intrapersonal, interpersonal, adaptability, stress management, and general mood. I'll explain that a little bit more, because then you get a grip of the concept of emotional intelligence. So first are the intrapersonal skills. That's the first aspect, intrapersonal. So that's inside your personality. So that's your emotional household. That's about yourself. That's more about your narcissistic parts, if you like to put it in different language. So emotional self-awareness is the ability to read your feelings. Are you into contact with what is in your bodily felt appearing? What is inside yourself? Are you able to read it, and are you able to use that? You have people with somatic complaints without a physiological cause, and nowadays it appears that they are unable to be connected with their deep-seated feelings, and instead of feeling what they should have felt, they produce a symptom. So being emotional self-aware is crucial. Of course, we did research in Indonesia in our group, and emotional self-awareness in the Indonesian population that we have tested was rather good. As a whole, I must tell you, it's a sad story. The emotional intelligence scores of the group we tested in Indonesia is 23 points below in the West. So when you score 100 as a mean in the West, it's a normal distribution. In Indonesia, it's 80, about 80. But emotional self-awareness is quite good. It's around 90 for the Indonesian population that we tested, and that Indonesian population was not representative. It were people from the big cities and who were well educated. So, emotional self-awareness and self-regard. Self-regard is the proudness you can have about yourself, and the knowledge you have about yourself as a person. So self-regard is a skill, emotional self-awareness is a sub-skill of that emotional intelligence test. And these two are compared to the other scores of the Indonesian people, they are in the lead. And that's good, because these two are the core of emotional intelligence. So according to our data so far, the Indonesian population has potential for developing their emotional intelligence. Assertiveness, you all know what assertiveness is. In translating the items in Bahasa, assertiveness was a problem, because it was difficult to find the right word. Like impulsivity was a problem, but in the end we worked it out. But assertiveness in Indonesia is a low score, a very low score, way behind the scores in the West. And in the West, people are more narcissistic and assertive, so sometimes a little bit too rough for here, but they are successful. They are efficient. It correlates with being successful in your life and with reaching your aims. Don't forget it. So assertiveness is a major concern here. Then we have self-actualization. Self-actualization is achievement motivation. I checked the scores in the morning, or it was at night. I kept puzzling about the scores in Indonesia and our Western score. Self-actualization is a low score here. It's also low, much lower. At least 22 points behind our mean. So that's more than a standard deviation. Standard deviation is 15 T-points. So it's a very significant difference. So self-actualization means that you get everything out of your person, that you employ your talents, that you use them, that you are proud of the talents, and that you get training for things. If you have a musical talent, you go in schooling, you get training, and you take care that you develop it. So and you enjoy it. All skills tell you something about enjoyment. If somebody scores high on assertiveness, they like to be assertive. If somebody scores high on self-esteem, they like their own person. They have that narcissistic look. And that's necessary in our neo-capitalistic world. You need some narcissism. If you do not have enough narcissism, you are way behind. You have to close the doors in the morning and in the evening. Then we have the independence. This is also a little bit sad news. Independence, when you compare it to the Western, that's pretty low. So the independence tells you something about psychological separation, individuation. It tells you something about grown up, about making your own decisions, being able to be autonomous, and developing your own life. It's a weak score, unfortunately. There's a lot to train, but it's trainable. Independence is trainable, like self-actualization, assertiveness is trainable. So it's all doable. So that's the intrapersonal part. It's a crucial part of emotional intelligence. It's about the own household, and now we come to the interpersonal skills. So the interpersonal skills have to do with how you perceive the other and what you take with you in your behavior based upon what you see. So empathy, everybody knows what empathy is. And do you like to be empathic? And empathy can be part of your behavior. When you work in healthcare, when you work in education, you have to be empathic. In the Netherlands, empathy is a problem. There's more narcissism around, also in healthcare, than empathy. And empathy, you feel that immediately, because then the person is interested in you, is interested in your motives, is interested in your feelings. And that's also crucial in being successful in interpersonal relationships. Empathy and interpersonal relationships, they hang together a little bit. In Indonesia, they are also lower than in the West. We expected them really to be higher. Because the family-oriented, the other-oriented culture, we thought, well, maybe empathy, interpersonal, some relationship will be a bit higher than in the West, but that's not the case. But they are not part of the very low scores. And the interpersonal relationship have to do with intimacy. Do you like to take people with you during your life cycle? Do you overlap with people? I always ask it when I have a male patient. I always ask them, do you have an intimate friend? And then the male patient will say yes or no. And when he says no, then I know that his interpersonal score is not so high. But when he says yes, I have a male friend, then I ask him one more question, and then I know enough, then I know that score. I don't need all the items anymore. So I ask him, does that male friend know that you are here sitting with me now? Most of the guys tell you, no, we talk about soccer. We talk about economics, but we don't talk about personal things. The patients who do that, who have more intensive, intimate relationships, they are treated better. They are treated easier, and they get better easier. So they are good clients for us, and they have a more developed, intimate relationship style. Then social responsibility is also part of it. And that's good to tell that on a Catholic university. Social responsibility means that you take care of your environment, that you are an environmental person, and that you take care of the elderly, and that you take care of children, that you are concerned about others. And the interesting empirical finding is the social responsibility score makes you more successful. It's part of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence is not only the narcissistic, assertive, active type of guy, it's also the lady and the man that take care of other people, are empathic, build up intimate relationships, and they take care of the society. And they don't like to put trouble on the street, they don't like to put their garbage on the street, no, they clean it up. It's measured in that test in a very nice way. So these are the interpersonal skills. Both are crucial. The intrapersonal and the internal household is crucial. That's about the self. And the interpersonal is about how you deal with the other, how good you are in perceiving the other person, and how you integrate that in your behavior. Your behavior is a motor with two cylinders. One cylinder is the self, the other cylinder is the other. And you need both for adequate functioning, and you have to be in balance. So then we have some adaptability skills. So these factors are contributing to emotional intelligence, but they are not the core. Reality testing, when reality testing is high, you are an accountant. You are always checking. I found in the data, reality testing in Indonesia is very low. It means that people live more in fantasy. They live more in fantasy. Artists are low on reality testing. We did a lot of studies in artists. They are low on reality testing. That was also our hypothesis, because they slip into fantasy. and then they bring something out, they make creative product, and they contribute to society. Flexibility. Do you like to change? Do you like changes when there is a merger in the firm you are working? Are you able to contribute, or are you more anxious? Flexibility in our modern times is crucial because everything is changing always. And when you like changes, you score higher. When you don't like changes and changes make you more anxious, then you score lower on this scale. And then problem solving. Problem solving is a good score in Indonesia. It's almost 100. So problem score is a strategy, step-by-step solving problems. And in your culture, so far we were possible to measure that, was a ready, nice score. Some stress management. So there is a stress tolerance scale. How well do you function under stress? Are you able to stay in one piece if the stress comes up? And that can be crucial in a stressful job. So we did a lot of testing of people in very high functions, and stress tolerance was always there. It was always very high. So when you are in the board of, when you are Bill Gates, when you are Bill Gates of, like Steve Jobs was, when you are in the board of a big firm, of now Mark Zuckerberg, those guys are toppers in stress tolerance. They are able to stay cool, also when it's about millions of dollars, or even more in their cases. And impulse control is an interesting skill. Impulse control means that you can control your impulses and you are not immediately acting out. So that you don't drink too much and you don't eat too much, and that you can keep an idea in your head and not say it immediately. So it was built upon the marshmallow test of Mitchell. He gave the children of 6 years a marshmallow, and then they said, well, those of you who can wait, you get one more. And then they did testing of the children and they checked them 20 years later, and then it appears that being able to control yourself and not eating the marshmallow and waiting until the second one came was crucial in their successfulness. We had an American president whose interpersonal relationship was very high, but his impulse control was a bit low. And that brought some problems. I don't know, I won't mention his name, but it was he's still there, but he was for 8 years American president of the USA. We were not able to test him, but I observed him a lot, so I pretty well know something about his scores. Then general mood, optimism. Optimism in Indonesia is a high score. That's nice at the end of the test. Optimism is a high score. So people here are optimistic. They are optimistic. Happiness is lower. Happiness is around 85. So, but happiness is momentarily. Happiness can change. Happiness is strongly correlated with the satisfying interpersonal relationship. Happiness in the humankind has to do with intimacy. If you have satisfying interpersonal relationship, your happiness score is higher. So it is not dependent upon the money you have. Some people think that. No, happiness is much more controlled by satisfying interpersonal relationships. So, well, it's a normal distribution of the test, and we put it, the mean on the 100, and then a standard deviation of 15, and that all is quite sound. What do you think? Who has a higher emotional intelligence score? In the West first. In the West. Are those the ladies or the men? Who's in favor of ladies? Hands? Who's in favor of men? Nobody? Oh, so? Well, the men think the men, and the ladies might think the ladies. Well, in the West, in the West European countries, in the US and Canada, they score equally high, but different on subtests. But the findings in Indonesia are different. Ladies are markedly higher in all subscales in Indonesia. So far in our data. So there's emotional potential, there's growth for emotional capabilities in the ladies. In this morning, I've seen a lot of ladies talking here, speaking here. There was one man, but he was outnumbered. So, well, the emotional capabilities of ladies at the university is strong, and that's supported by the test. When we look at the different sub-scores, then well, the test produces the typical, stereotypical gender differences. Ladies are stronger in empathy, social responsibility, interpersonal relationship, and emotional self-awareness. We knew that already in psychology, but the test also shows that. Men typically stronger in stress, independence, self-regard, optimism, and assertiveness. They are a bit stronger in that, but it equals out in the West, and that's in all Western European countries and in North America. So you can use emotional intelligence score in the corporate world, you can use it in healthcare, you can use it in schooling, and we did a whole lot of testing. We tested many different groups, and we had their mean scores, and we compared them with each other. We did experiments, we did training in emotional intelligence, that we gave in group training, and then we tested before and after the group, and we had a control group, and then in all cases, emotional intelligence appeared to be trainable. People get ahead. People are able to grow, and they profit of the feedback. And in the emotional intelligence training, you give a lot of feedback. And you do behavioral training, you do cognitive exercises and rehearsals, and it's helpful. We had a whole lot of groups tested. I won't talk about that all, but we also selected very successful people in the Netherlands. We selected them on all kinds of different criteria. Then we took them the test. In that group, big group of very successful people, there was nobody with a score under 125. So 100 is the mean, 15 is the standard deviation, and they were above 125. So there's a correspondence, there's a correlation between being successful in your life and your test score. And the test somehow does it. It is somehow remarkably well in somehow predicting who will be successful and who not. In the corporate world, it's used a lot because they want to check their personnel. Where's our talent? And they put it in the files of the employees, and they train people in emotional intelligence. That's now part of our society. It became integrated in many professions, in training in emotional intelligence. It's integrated in the medical doctor training at the moment, because they were not empathic enough. We did emotional intelligence testing in some physicians, and their empathy and interpersonal relationship scores were around the mean, but you have to be higher when you are in a profession like that. So they are being trained. And it can be trained. I tend to do it also individually in coaching in some persons, and where you can, and then I make a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy and psychodynamic interventions, and then you see that it will change. The first assessment, he had only 82 overall emotional intelligence score, and then he went to 108. He won't be a high scorer because there is a range for it, but it's more than 20 points difference based upon the training of 7 sessions. The research here is from Jaya, Unika. She's in the final part of her PhD study under the supervision of Dr. Lena Halim and myself, and she's doing a very nice job. She was able to test about some 2,500 people from several cities in Indonesia. So you see them mentioned there. And of course, this is a major job. It's very difficult to organize that. And not everybody can be tested. Not everybody can fill in a questionnaire like that. You need enough cognitive skills and reading capabilities. So the population, of course, that we tested doesn't equal the complete Indonesian population. And it is nice that we have now complementary data on emotional intelligence. We do have, of course, IQ data. We have data on cognitive intelligence of the Indonesian population. I don't want to end sad, but in science you have to look at facts. The last study was done in Bali. I still have 1 minute. And in Bali, the general intelligence appeared to be 70 if you compare to the 100 in the West. And the younger people scored 83. So there is a growth in cognitive intelligence in Indonesia in the younger generation. And emotional intelligence is not that low. So the emotional intelligence score of Indonesia so far we know is not as low as cognitive intelligence. So there is a potential growth and a possibility in the Indonesian population. And when you look at the way in which you have to do that, the way in which you can stimulate cognitive intelligence and emotional intelligence, I think we have to talk about upbringing. I think we have to begin with talking about the first 5 years of life. And then in those first 5 years, I developed a theory about stimulating cognitive and emotional intelligence during childhood. And you do that by stimulation in the upbringing and frustration. A combination of optimal stimulation and frustration, and not leaving the kids in a symbiotic relationship the first 4 years, like I see happening in many parts of Indonesia. Then the children are the first 4 years only in this more what we call psychoanalytically a symbiotic relationship. They are not enough stimulated and frustrated. And their cognitive patterns won't grow as strong as they can. So I think we can do, based upon the knowledge we have about cognitive intelligence, about emotional intelligence, I think we can contribute to the younger generations, and we can help them to raise their scores and be prepared for the complex society that we have around us. And then in Indonesia we need a middle class. We need a narcissistic middle class with emotional intelligence quite well trained, because then they can support some democracy. They can fight against all bureaucratic or other types of other types of situations who are not correct, and they can be the spokespeople of a society, but they need to be trained, and they have to enhance their cognitive and emotional intelligence, and we will help. Thank you for the attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome Professor Benton on the stage, please. Thank you.
Hello everybody. Can you hear me okay at the back? Is that okay? Good. Before I make my presentation, in a university that's become something like my second home, thanks to the friendship and support from my colleagues in the Department of Psychology, I just want to give my personal thanks to some people that have played a very important role in helping make this anniversary an anniversary of success. I'd like to thank Ibu Murni for her current role as Dean. I want to give particular personal thanks to Ibu Hannah for helping me develop the business psychology component within the master's program. But I owe profound thanks to Ibu Bernadette, who 10 years ago had the confidence in my program of business psychology and the courage to encourage its development here at the university. So my personal thanks to you all for making me feel welcome and valued. My presentation today. Well, after the cracking presentation just before me, I have a hard act to follow. But it did raise some relevant questions to my presentation, and it is about emotional intelligence. And I do wonder how we sometimes challenge ourselves without knowing it. So my presentation is trying to identify where those challenges to our behavior comes from. Okay, can I just try the... So, in practice, conflict in organizations is going to be damaging to performance, damaging to relationships, and because of the stress that it creates between people, it's very likely to be damaging to people's sense of well-being. The evidence is that conflict in organizations is widespread and that it is escalating. Most of us encounter conflict in the workplace as a form of difference, a difference of feeling, a difference of thinking, a difference of strength of feeling between people. And these natural differences are often escalated into conflict because the information processing capacity within and between people is subverted or undermined by emotional defense mechanisms. And these emotional defense mechanisms are triggered by anxiety. And as we know, because we study these things in psychology, such mechanisms are likely to be habitual. So our habitual forms of behavior that we rely on when we're in conflict are largely going to let us down and to fail. Because they are habitual, we are habitually condemned to repeat the same failing conflict behaviors, conflict resolution behaviors, time after time. It is learning to combat these habits that can allow us to develop better conflict resolution skills and to promote positive conflict negotiated outcomes. But clearly, the evidence shows that conflict is widespread, it's spreading more, and its intensity is escalating. So let's look at some of the reasons why these pressures are building. I've highlighted some material in red, and the first one that I'd like to mention is the fact that conflict really starts to emerge when people believe that the objective of their goals, their objectives and their goals, become incompatible with the other person's objectives and goals. Once that perception sits in, it generates a very difficult conflict situation. The other aspect, time pressure, I've highlighted in red. The action of pressure on time between people simply accentuates the judgments that are being made between people and around issues and around topics. And the other aspect in red, volatility in workplace, refers to the way in which people's working roles in organizations are constantly being reviewed, re-engineered, and challenged. And that doesn't just mean that our job specifications change or our job descriptions change. It means that the way in which we have to learn to negotiate and work with our colleagues is also changing rapidly. And that adds an extra level of pressure to the environment within which we work. So pressure is clearly an important issue, and it impinges at three levels: at the individual level, at the group level, and the organizational level. But for group, I think we can read team. And it's at here that the full weight of organizational pressures often are found. Because not only do teams have to deal with information that is ambiguous, under very tight time constraints, not knowing exactly what the right solution will look like, not understanding exactly how to implement the decisions. Not only do they have to deal with all of those cognitive and time-pressured information processing events, they have to deal with the most difficult variable. That, of course, is once they're in a team, they need to understand and work with other people. Other people, when the information is ambiguous, when things are changing fast, when time is limited or will change, deadlines change. Under those conditions, working with people can become another aspect of pressure, interpersonal pressure. So I think sometimes this pressure in teams can split teams in half. or split them into different pieces so you get different factions in the team. And if you're very astute and you're a good behavioral scientist, you can identify when this is happening. The signs are quite subtle sometimes, but in this situation, they're a little bit more obvious. Teams divide, and they can identify victims in the teams, they can identify winners or losers, but if the team process breaks down, information processing fails, the consequence is that the team itself develops an anxiety defense mechanism. And that anxiety defense mechanism then dominates the way in which people interact. Sometimes it's not as obvious as this. Sometimes we're not even sure that we're in conflict, particularly when there are regional differences, differences of language, differences of culture. We're not sure, but the clues are there. They may be subtle clues, just a word behind someone's mouth, not quite talking directly, or a glance, or a facial expression that might show interest, but it might show contempt. Somebody might be thinking deeply about what you've just said, or you may think, they're being a bit dismissive. So sometimes the clues are there, and as behavioral psychologists, we think we should be able to evaluate them. Other times, it's more direct, it's less difficult to identify, but usually by the time it's got to this stage, everybody knows that you're in conflict, and conflict is very difficult to manage. There's another dimension to pressure. Not only is a team an environment of pressure, not only is what they have to do, process difficult information that's complex, ambiguous, changing, difficult, not only do they need to deal with people, but increasingly in organizations, people are being encouraged, can you believe this, to conflict. It is being taught and encouraged to be a useful dimension when people are looking to create new ideas, to have a strong ideation program so that any idea is valued, but before it's valued, it needs to be critically assessed, critically reviewed, and that is often a process of information exchange. This dimension of pressure for creativity is going to grow in all the organizations that we're likely to encounter. The cost of conflict, which I'll outline in a moment, is immense. And organizations are looking to balance the sheet. They need to invest in developing, and they will, positive conflict resolution behaviors and skills. And it is in these positive conflict resolution skills that people argue and are teaching that you can realize that golden award, that golden prize, innovation. Creating new ways to look at ideas that have been around requires a form of synergy to occur. And you cannot get synergy without generating differences and then synthesizing those differences between people, let's say within a team, within an organization, in order to create a practical, viable product or solution. And that requires hard work on the information and hard work on the emotional content as well. The two are needed. If you only have one, you get out of balance outcomes. Brilliant ideas may not be translated into deliverables, or they become impractical. So there's another dimension of pressure within organizations, but the largest pressure that we've been teaching since 10 years ago is that if we want to understand how people behave and why people behave the way they do, we need to understand why organizations are structured the way they are. We have to appreciate that organizations live in a highly complex world. And that world is being driven, and has increasingly been driven, by what some authors have referred to as turbo-economics. This idea, this idea is that I shouldn't play with technology in public, but if we take global pressures to one side and look at it in particular now, what we see is something called turbo-economics, or some authors refer to it as turbo-capitalism. It simply describes what has happened to your country, to my country, to every country on the planet over the last 10 to 15 years to greater or lesser degrees. It means that the free market now dictates massively what happens to organizations. A capacity to be competitive, effective, competitive is not just measured against your next door neighbor or what your next door neighbor is able to do in the marketplace. It is measured against the person in Germany, in America, in China, in Malaysia. It's measured against the global marketplace capacity. So your product doesn't just have to compete locally. If you're going to expand, we know there are no special deals for you from your government. There are no special deals from the government to support phases of development. Your company has to bear the cost, and to do that it needs to make profit, and it needs to make more profit now than ever before. And that is adding a pressure to organizational thinking and acting, because they have less time to develop products and get it into the marketplace and to win that market share before there's another competitor, not from next door, but from another part of the planet, who has taken your development work probably and said thank you very much, and then will produce it at half the price with a slight variation, and before you know it, your 100% share of your market is 50%, but your cost is still 100%. So there are some deep structural issues which govern the way in which organizations have to compete in this day's world. And it's driven by what we laughingly refer to as the free market, but this is the reality that every government on the planet, some slight exceptions, has embraced fully. This creates pressure for the organization. For the organization, the middle section here, because the organization has to re-engineer its internal structures effectively to cope with the external pressures which are ongoing and ever-changing. And the risks are immense. The risks for success are very strong. You can be a big winner, but equally you are vulnerable. There's no safety net outside you. There's no government block grant coming in. If you get it wrong, you lose, and your company suffers badly. You can lose everything or a bit, but you lose market share, and the value of your company will be seen largely in terms of its market share. I don't know if there are any alumni from the courses I've taught here over the years, but they would be more familiar with psychologists having to think about the economic dimensions. But for most psychologists, we tend only to think about the behavioral. Rightly so, that's where we're the experts. But if we want to know why behaviors are changing in a certain direction, sometimes it helps understand the pressures that are directing that direction of change. And those pressures are first and foremost, in this analysis, economic. And those economic